Are you ready to unmute your power? Are you sick and tired of being told to shut up? Welcome to Something to Say with me, Jamie Shae, because silence is no longer an option. This is not just a podcast, it's a revolution. This is for the women who are done tolerating mediocrity, done biting their tongues, and done playing small. With bold truths and unfiltered insights, I'll help you rip off that proverbial muzzle, put your stake in the ground, and take back the power you were told to suppress. You were never meant to be silent. The world is waiting to hear your voice. It's time to speak up, and speaking up starts now. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Shae, and you are listening to Something to Say on Transformation Talk Radio. Today, we're talking about how the time for silence is over. We expose the real history of women being silenced, how it's still playing out today, and why reclaiming our voices is the most radical thing we can do. Every first and third Wednesday on Something to Say, we will have some of the most powerful, trailblazing, change-making, badass women on here, inspiring you to take back your power, your life, and your voice. I believe our voice is one of the most powerful tools we possess, which is why it's been taken from us for so long. Who taught you that silence was the price of acceptance? Before you even knew what power was, someone was already taking it from you. You were taught to be quiet before you ever learned to speak. As a little girl, you were told to be polite, to smile and be nice. You were told to sit still, be quiet, and to make yourself small. And maybe it was in your home or your church, or maybe it was in a relationship where loving someone meant losing yourself. I know I was there. I was taught from a young age that my voice did not matter. And I believed that for a really long time. Last year, my dad passed away. And although we were never close, when I learned of his passing, during one of my meditations, he came to me. And in that meditation, I became a little girl. And he sat down on the ground, eye level with me. And he said, "I'm sorry I stole your wings." And then he held out his hand and opened it. Inside his hand was a white butterfly. That white butterfly flew from the palm of his hand onto my shoulder. And then the butterfly wings became my wings. And I became this huge being, and the wings became huge with me. And my father became smaller and smaller. And although at the time I didn't really know what he meant by stealing my wings, a photo flashed instantly at the end of that meditation, and it was my father and me. I was wearing pink, and we were holding hands on a dance floor. I came to realize since then that him stealing my wings is the same as being silenced. Weeks later, as I was cleaning out his home, I found that photo that flashed in front of my eyes. And I took it as confirmation that it was real, that he came to me in my meditation. And that was his way of apologizing for silencing me. My father clipped my wings when I was a child. He made me afraid to speak. He made me afraid to have fun. He robbed me of joy of my childhood. He silenced me. And look, this isn't personal to me. Being silenced is historical. It's biblical. It's systemic. Women have been silenced since the beginning of time. This happens all too often still today. In the witch trials, our voices were a literal death sentence. In politics, in religion, and even in our own homes, silence was forced upon us. And the most dangerous part, we started believing that silence was our duty. Silence wasn't just forced upon us, it was woven into our conditioning, disguised as virtue, loyalty, and love. And It was made to feel normal and even necessary for our survival. From the moment we're born, women are praised for being compliant. Be a good girl, stay out of trouble, don't be difficult. Translation: go along to get along, don't challenge the status quo, and don't make waves, even when you're drowning. Not if, but when. And my personal favorite: boys will be boys. Translation: accept a tolerable and sometimes intolerable level of abuse, treatment, disrespect, unhappiness, and oh, by the way, don't talk about it. We were taught that being liked was more important than being heard, that being agreeable was more valuable than being truthful, that what we have to say is not important. We're taught that our silence is a gift to the world, a way to make others more comfortable. But silence is not a gift. It's a weapon used against us. And history has taught us one thing: speak and you will disappear. Women didn't just accept silence. We were conditioned to believe it was the only way to stay safe. Silence kept us from being punished, from being abandoned, and from being labeled as too much. We watched our mothers bite their tongue and our grandmothers stay quiet when they should have been screaming. Hearing our mothers and sisters be asked questions like, well, what were you wearing? Or, but what did you say to provoke that? Or, did you deserve it though? We were conditioned to believe silence was the price we had to pay to exist in a world built by men for the benefit of men. And if we dared to step out of line, well, we get what we deserve. Entire generations of women's stories, inventions, and wisdom have disappeared or been stolen. But let me tell you something. Silence was never meant to save us or keep us safe. It was meant to erase us. Who taught you that your silence made you more lovable, made you more acceptable, that keeping the peace was more important than keeping yourself? Let that question sink in, because that is where the unlearning begins. The moment a woman speaks, really speaks, something shifts. That's why we're shamed and threatened and dismissed when we do it, because our voices have real power. When we tell our stories, we write ourselves back into history. When we speak up, we reclaim the space we were told wasn't ours. When we refuse to be erased, we refuse to be controlled. So now I ask you, where have you been silenced? And who benefits from that silence? If you are one of the trailblazing, courageous women who've already reclaimed your voice, tell me, what was the moment you knew you couldn't stay silent anymore? For me, it came after I was on my knees for an hour praying for God to change my heart so that I could find the will to stay in my marriage another day, one more day, and keep my family together. I'd been with my husband for 14 years, and I thought we'd be together forever. We were the perfect couple. Everyone thought so. But I had no voice in that marriage anymore. What I wanted, what I needed, my dreams, my feelings didn't matter anymore. I felt reduced to nothing more than a servant, there to take care of our children, the home, the pets, the cars, the yard, and of course, my husband's needs at the snap of his fingers. I was given crumbs and told I should be grateful. I was made to feel guilty because I wanted a career or to go back to college or something for myself. What he allowed me to have should be enough, was the message I got loud and clear. But it wasn't enough. And somewhere under the shame, the guilt, the resentment, the rage, and the exhaustion that I felt all at once, all the time, was the constant yearning of my soul. And every day that I ignored it, my soul was dying a little bit, shrinking away. And I was terrified that if I waited too long, I'd never be able to recover it. It wasn't until one day both my children were somewhere else and I was alone driving over a bridge. And I thought, well, no one would know it wasn't an accident if I drove off this bridge. But I realized how deeply unhappy I was. I didn't want to leave my children motherless, and that's the only reason I didn't do it. But dying a physical death felt less painful than the slow soul death I was experiencing in that marriage. And that was my moment. And so I told my husband, hey, I have something to say. And I told him I wanted a divorce. And I reclaimed my life. My soul came back alive. No matter where you are, I promise you there's always a breaking point, a moment when the silence becomes heavier than your truth. Maybe it's the day you swallow your pain one too many times, or the moment you sit in a meeting and watch a man take credit for your idea again, or the night you say, I'm fine for the 100th time when your soul is screaming enough. It may not be loud. It may not be dramatic. It may be a whisper inside you that says, no more. This is how it starts. Not with a roar, but with a reckoning. And every time you silence yourself, you betray yourself. Think about that. How many times have you bitten your tongue to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to make someone else uncomfortable at the expense of your own truth? Because each time you do, a piece of you disappears. Not all at once, but little by little. You become a version of yourself that is easier for the world to digest, sure, but harder for you to recognize. And one day you'll look in the mirror and you won't know you anymore. Every time you don't speak up, you teach the world that your voice does not matter. And the world is more than happy to believe it. They will take your silence as compliance. They will use it to write your story for you, to mold you into what they need. Because a woman who does not speak is a woman who does not challenge, does not disrupt, and does not threaten the system. And that is their favorite kind of woman. Because they're not afraid of her. They're afraid of the woman who speaks. There is a big portion of us who are unaware of all the ways that women are silenced. Because silence doesn't always look like keeping your mouth shut. And being vocal doesn't mean you haven't been silenced. Sometimes silence looks like saying yes when every fiber of your being is screaming no, or smiling when you're uncomfortable because you don't want to make it awkward, or apologizing for things that aren't your fault just to smooth things over, or dismissing your own instincts because someone else knows better. When we don't speak up or stand up for ourselves, it's called self-erasure, erasing yourself to fit someone else's expectations. And we've been taught to do it so well that we don't even notice we're doing it anymore. And yes, speaking up is scary. I'm not diminishing that or how difficult it can be to leave abusive or toxic relationships and situations. I know this, I've been there. And that's why I know if I can escape and find myself again, so can you. Speaking up risks rejection, judgment, conflict, at the very least. It makes people uncomfortable and angry. You do have to use your own judgment and discernment and be your own best advocate for sure to know if it's safe. But the cost is your confidence, your power, your self-worth, and your identity. Now, I want you to ask yourself, when was the last time you bit your tongue instead of saying what was really on your mind? And when was the last time you swallowed your rage instead of letting it rise? And let me ask you this, did it serve you? Did it free you? Or did it leave you feeling small? Your truth was not meant to be swallowed. Your voice is your most powerful tool at your disposal, and I'm here to help you sharpen it. You are listening to Something to Say with Jamie Shae. Find out more about me and what I offer at guidedbyjamie.com. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we will explore more about how to reclaim the most powerful tool you have, your voice. Stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Something to Say with me, Jamie Shae. We are going to talk about how to reclaim your voice starting now. So, question, what would you say if you knew you would be heard? And what if the very thing you've been afraid to say is the thing that could set you free? They taught us that silence was safety, that if we just kept our heads down and our mouths shut and we played by the rules, we'd be okay. But here's the truth. Silence was never safety. Silence is submission. And if we want to change the world, we cannot submit. Look at Rosa Parks. She refused to submit. Her quiet defiance in refusing to give up her seat to a white man with just one word, no, changed the world. Her decision to stay seated started a movement. This simple yet courageous act of staying still had massive impact. Reclaiming your voice is the same. It is a radical act that will have massive impact on your life and those around you. Because every time a woman speaks her truth, she shatters the system built to contain her. Speaking up is how we break cycles. Speaking up is how we rewrite the rules. And speaking up is how we take back our power. And let's be clear, the world is terrified of a woman who refuses to be silenced. They know what happens when we rise. They know what happens when we stop apologizing. And they know what happens when we finally own our voices. We become unstoppable. So what would you say? Would you call out the lies you've been told? Would you finally say no to the expectations, to the shame, to the silence? Would you demand more for yourself, for your life, for your sisters, for the women who came before you and the ones who come after? Because this is not just about speaking. This is about being heard. It's about being believed when we do speak. You don't need to ask for permission. You do not need to wait to be chosen. You just need to take up space and decide that you belong in every room you want to be in. Decide to be impossible to ignore. Because when a woman speaks with certainty and conviction, people will listen, even if they don't want to. No more good girl, no more people pleasing. Decide what you really want and just go for it. Decide to please you. Decide who you are and just be that. By speaking up, by being bold, by taking risks, you actually give other women the courage to do that and be that. And that is how we start to change the world. This is what they don't want us to know. No, the moment we stop apologizing for our existence, we actually become unstoppable. Your silence serves them. They profit from our self-doubt. Knowing our self-worth will actually crumble the entire system. They count on us staying afraid. Don't believe it when they tell you you're too much, when they tell you to tone it down or soften your edges and to be more palatable. They're not actually trying to help you. They're trying to confine you. Your voice is your sword. Your truth is your superpower. And your confidence is your shield. When you realize that, your presence becomes a disruption And that, my friend, is a good thing because nothing changes until someone refuses to stay silent. You don't need permission except your own. You don't need validation except your own. And you don't need to be liked by anyone except yourself. You just need to decide that your voice is worth hearing because it is. They conditioned us to believe that speaking up is dangerous, but what's more dangerous is living in a world where we don't. What happens when a woman refuses to be silent? She remembers who she is. She remembers her power. She becomes undeniable, unstoppable, and unforgettable. We have talked about silence. We've talked about the fear of speaking up. And we have talked about what happens when a woman finds her voice. I ask, what are you going to do about it? Where would we be if people like Sojourner Truth hadn't stood up and demanded ain't I a woman? She fearlessly fought for abolition and women's rights and racial equality. Or Susan B. Anthony, who dared to defy the law, relentlessly fighting for women's rights to vote. She paved the way for generations of change makers. And our male allies are important. Male allies like Barack Obama, Justin Trudeau, both of whom made gender equality a core focus of their leadership. You don't have to be someone of importance or do something huge to start a movement. That's not my point. My point is these women didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for the right time. They spoke, they moved, they refused to conform, and history changed. And they've made the world better for us all. Where would we be today if they had believed the condition? We are still fighting battles today. Some we thought we'd already won, only for them to be taken away by men who are afraid of powerful women. We still have restrictive laws limiting women's choices over our own bodies. There's still silencing of marginalized voices, threatening to erase the experiences and truths of many, making it hard for them to be seen or heard. And there are waves of misogynistic rhetoric flooding social media, discouraging women from speaking out. And if you mention certain words like patriarchy, or a word that means not putting men at the center of your world, you can actually be silenced or canceled altogether. This is why silence can no longer be an option. Women's voices, choices, and power are being challenged and quietly stripped away. And the only way forward is to speak louder, stand together, and refuse to be erased. The moment a woman speaks against expectation, she disrupts the status quo. And history shows that disruptive, outspoken women are often called difficult, angry, or crazy. They can call me crazy. But it's not because we're wrong. It's because we're right and dangerous to those in power. Historian Laurel Thatcher Ulrich said, well-behaved women seldom make history. Well, the time of being well-behaved is behind us. It's time to be disruptive. Don't you feel it? If your voice didn't matter, they wouldn't try so hard to shut us up. The louder a woman gets, the more of a threat she is. And society will try to shame her and discredit her and silence her once again. Look at Malala Yousafzai. She risked her life to demand education for girls, standing fearlessly against oppression and inspiring a global movement for equality. She still is refusing to be silenced, even though she was shot in the head. That is courage. And I know most women don't stay silent because they want to. They do it because they think they're alone. I'm here to tell you, you're not alone. I know I have something to say. And I know you do too. What is it? My voice isn't just for me. Your voice isn't just for you. It's for the women who need to hear it, to know she's not crazy. She's not alone or powerless. Are you ready to stand with me and all the women who came before us, who who work so hard for our right to speak, to vote, and to make choices in our own best interests, for our daughters and our granddaughters, so they can be free, so they don't ever have to forget the sound of their own voices. Because enough is enough. Enough of the silence, enough of the shrinking, enough of being told to sit down, smile pretty, and be grateful for the crumbs we never asked for. They've built entire worlds on our backs and our obedience. No more. Imagine a world where men and women recognize and celebrate each other's strengths and gifts, and we work together to build a world where we all benefit, not just a few. We were never meant to be quiet or made to be small. We are the power, the life givers, the co-creators, the change makers of the universe, the force that creates and changes everything. What if the world is waiting for you to speak up? What if the thing you're afraid to say is what someone else is praying to hear? Brittany Packett said, "You never know who is counting on you to be brave." Somebody is waiting for you, and you get to decide what the world will remember about you. If you don't speak up, the world will write your story for you. My tagline states that silence is no longer an option, and I believe that to be true, but I also believe that there is a time for silence. And when silence is used at the right time in the right way, it can be more powerful than words. Our deeds, our actions, or inactions is what speaks loudest about our character, about who we are and what we stand for. It was in Rosa Parks' refusal to move that made a statement, and that statement ignited a movement. Movements create change. Change happens from us being fed up with what is. It's time we're fed up with being silenced. I'll end this episode with this quote from Olive Schreiner's The Woman Wanderer. The woman wanderer goes forth to seek the land of freedom. The woman cries out, "For what do I go to this far land which no one has ever reached? Oh, I am alone. I am utterly alone." And reason said to her, "Silence, what do you hear?" And she said, "I hear the sound of feet 1,000 times, 10,000s of thousands of thousands, and they beat this way. They are the feet of those that shall follow you. Lead on." This quote emphasizes the responsibility of those who dare to break new ground. When you step into your power, even when uncertain or afraid, you pave the way for others to rise, follow, and find their own voice. It's never too late to have something to say. I'm Jamie Shae. I'll see you next time. You've been listening to Something to Say with me, Jamie Shae, because silence is no longer an option. Catch me live every first and third Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, on transformationtalkradio.com to learn how you too can rip off your proverbial muzzle. Silence was never your destiny. It's time to speak up. Subscribe to my channel to listen first when new episodes drop. Follow me on social media and visit guidedbyjamie.com to join the community that has something to say.